Welcome back, everybody, to iNN's Headlines and Beyond. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and I'm your host here for this edition, the weekend edition of Headlines and Beyond. It's the edition for the 12th week of 2015. So tonight's title is Limited Nuclear War. Is there such a possibility? The United States and a number of militaries around the world that are nuclear powers look at a strategy, look at war games as a way of trying to find out whether or not there's a possibility of what they call a limited nuclear strike. In other words, is a country that is nuclear capable weak enough to be attacked with nuclear missiles in such a way that it's a limited number and it can actually produce a positive outcome? Actually, this has been pondered by the United States more than once. And the question is, as news comes up that I've got from various different sources, that the United States recently, under Obama, the peacemaker, has seriously considered actually launching a first strike. I have to go back and confirm my sources. I have to go back and take a look at things on a more careful basis, but there's enough plausible evidence to suggest that the United States would indeed consider something like this if it thought it had the upper hand over Russia, because the United States never stopped fighting the Cold War. It never stopped fighting Russia, even though Russia signaled defeat. And, the United States wasn't going to end with surrender. It was going to end up destroying all of Russia and taking everything that Russia had, taking all that territory. And this is sort of the battle for global dominance. So the United States went from a protector of individual freedoms to a global conquering power, an empire, if you will. And the question is, would the United States consider a first nuclear strike, or so-called limited nuclear war? And the answer is yes, they would. There is a good possibility that they would do that. The question is, did they? Anyways, tonight we're going to go further into analysis. We're going to start looking at some of the history here. I said we're doing journalism as observational psychology, so we are going to get into some of the history. We're going to get into some of the psychology of the history, some of the sort of the behaviors behind it, and look at some more of this whole thing about the conspiracy theories. And see how they sort of fit into the various different bits and pieces here. And what I've put in the notes here, if you look at the description notes down below, or in the description, or what I put out, there's always an alternative titles. And the alternative titles just simply go over a large chunk of different ideas that are continuing in the series here. And the other one, the main one is The American Empire, Freedom for a Few, Decoding the Illuminati and the New World Order, looking at the history behind all this, Socialism, Pedophiles, and Psychopathic Societies, Obama's World at War, it's the Cold War 2.0, Iraq 2.0, Afghanistan 2.0, most of the Middle East is in flames now and destabilized. Not to mention Ukraine, and now it looks like Hungary is going to be destabilized as well. Hungary is on the next sort of path of destruction in the U.S.'s point of view. And of course, we're going to continue our look in the second half of the program into sex abuse, and looking at the psychology of sex abuse, and how it actually, sex abuse in terms of the psychopathic behavior is actually one of the outcomes of a socialist society. As a socialist society grows, as it develops, it becomes very psychopathic. And sex abuse is one of the outcomes, is one of the products of socialism and the psychopathic society. So they do go hand in hand together, and this can indeed be observed. And we will look at this observation. We will take a look at what we see out there in the news, in sort of the available information, and say, is this what's happening? Do we see with a socialist society, Do we see psychopathic behavior? Do we see sex abuse as a result of the psychopathic behavior? And for my own observation, I would say, yes, this is indeed true. So that means that we have to get into sort of things like MK Ultra. We have to look at some of the historical workings of psychology, how psychology emerged, where it was used, where it wasn't used, and so on and so forth. That sort of leads us into studies like on Stanley Milgram, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and then you can take the studies from that base point from Stanley Milgram and Dr. Philip Zimbardo. You can take that and go into something known as MK Ultra. That is the Department of Defense's look at psychology and its use of psychology. You also need to go look into the history of LSD. You have to do a study on LSD and how it was used within psychology. This is something that's in many cases a necessity, because it is indeed part of the history of psychology in psychiatry. So something that really does need to be looked at. We're not simply doing topographical news where you can sit back and relax. This is analysis. We're doing analytical. We're doing intelligence work. If you were an intelligence analyst, if you wanted to be an intelligence analyst, you would have to go out and find all the bits and pieces, and from all the bits and pieces, put together what's actually happening in the world. That's what an intelligence analyst does. And in many cases, this is intelligence analysis. This is analyzing the intelligence that comes from around the world, what's going on in the world, and piecing together and see what's actually happening here, going beyond the headline, going beyond the standard sort of the 2-bit line, the headline, to see what's actually going on. To insist in this and to sort of keep the headlines topical, we are bringing out on a new service called Tweetlines. Tweetlines is, Tweetlines. Tweetlines are headlines. They're 30-second headlines pushed out on Twitter, based on various different articles that pop up. We'll take an article from one of our sources, one of the major news broadcasters, push it out, and then we'll have a 30-second commentary on it that will sort of put this in context. So that gives you more of a sort of call a more timely access to headlines here, rather than going towards a standard or mainstream media outlet. So, as I said, what you should be doing once you get used to this, once you get comfortable, you should be taking your notes. You should be taking, writing things down, things that you find interesting. Part of the challenge is when you're looking at 30 different sources. Like I've been doing that over the week, just sort of looking at a variety of different sources. As these sources pop up, I think there's I went through 40 different sources this week, 40 different bits of material, and that's about 40 hours worth of work. And the thing is, not everything has, most of the stuff, 95% of the stuff, there isn't a lot of information. You take bits and pieces of notes here and there. It's not all the information is useful. But if you can match an event from one independent source with 2 or 3 other different sources, each giving a perspective, the more pieces, the more independent sources you can piece together, will give you a better picture of what's actually happening, because you're getting from a variety of different perspectives. And the way I liken this out, and this is sort of how I go into the studies of Illuminati, the NWO, and so on and so forth, is I look at all these different conspiracy theories and theorists, and understand that inside the conspiracy theorists, and this is what sort of lets you know that the conspiracy theories and theorists are not necessarily bogus, but you actually have intelligence analysts in there. You actually have the CIA intelligence operators actively in there throwing out false information. Well, why would you have an intelligence operative doing this? Well, it often depends on the party. Give an example. You watch a lot of these sort of NWO stuff, New World Order, and 95% of the time they're talking about Bush, they're talking about Reagan, they're talking about Republicans. And if you watch it carefully, it's mostly Bush, Reagan, and the attacks are very particular on a person. But when you sit down and look at what's actually happening, look at sort of the entire timeline of things, and look at all the different events, you realize that it's not all Bush, but it's actually more than that. The Democrats are involved. You have a number of parties involved in an event in this history here that are not always recognized or brought out by the conspiracy theory or by that particular documentary or the lecture that you're watching. A lot of times the videos aren't actually documentaries; they're lectures, and someone's giving a lecture in front of the C-SPAN. They're giving a lecture at a library, or they're giving a lecture at a club or something like that. And a lot of times the lectures are pretty interesting. You can just sort of go through and listen to the lecture. And it's interesting to see how they present the information. And a lot of times, how they present the information will sort of let you know how the author, that lecturer is biased. And that's that all reporters, all researchers are biased. Everybody has a bias. And you need to identify the bias in order to put the content that you're hearing in context. And this is why I said I don't edit anything out of here, because you need to see the full context in this. You need to see my mistakes. You need to see my stuttering. You need to see my fatigue. You need to see my yawning. You need to see my runny nose. These things all place a context to the material that I bring. It gives you an idea of who I am, what my behaviors are, and in many ways, the way I think. This is part of the analysis. So when you go back and say, okay, this is what he presented, this is who he is, you can sort of get an idea, well, maybe he is more honest, or maybe he is not as biased as I thought he was. Or maybe, he's bringing out both sides of the issue. And this is sort of what you have to do here. And when I've looked at, and you look at this long enough, what you have is you have two children, let's say, who have been naughty. Let's use that term. They've been naughty. They've been misbehaving. But you don't know exactly what they've done. What happens is you don't have to actually say anything to the kids. You just sort of have to sit them down and let them talk. And they kind of know they've been caught at something, but they don't know exactly what they've been caught at. Because, you haven't said anything yet. If you leave it long enough, one kid is going to start ratting the other kid out. And as soon as that first kid opens their mouth to start, hey, this is what happened, but it wasn't my fault, it was his fault, the other kid's going to go chime in and say, well, no, this is what happened, and it's all his fault. In other words, they start pointing fingers at it. And if you take the conversation from both sides, you figure out everything that happened, more or less. And this is what's happening here, is you have, in many cases, you have a lot of Democrats coming out of the government saying, this is what the Bush government did. You have a lot of Democrats within the government themselves, within these sort of various different groups within the government, like environmentalists, the peaceniks, all these different groups inside the Democratic Party, because the Democrats want to be all-inclusive. When you get them in the government, and you have all these people who are activists and whistleblowers, you can't control the leaks that are coming out of it. And because you can't control the leaks, the amount of information that comes out is enormous, and it's like these two kids ratting each other out, and one by one, everybody starts spilling their guts, and if you can start connecting the pieces together, you figure out what happens. And by doing this, you can actually put together a good enough timeline to realize that it's not only the Republicans doing things, but it's the Democrats as well. And this is how this could be demonstrated. That these things are not all interconnected. That there are a variety of different views and perspectives on these things. And of course, there are people out there who will recognize these two groups are fighting and say, well, I'm going to profit from both sides. And they'll get involved on both sides of the aisle, and they'll profit from both sides of the aisle. It's not that they pick sides. Their interest is in the profit. They want to know what they're going to get out of it. And so they get involved on both sides, hoping for the best outcome from either side. And if they're lucky enough, or if their God smiles on them, they'll get rich from both sides. They'll make money off of both sides. So it doesn't matter where the money comes, as long as the money's coming in, as long as they're making money and they're happy with the money they've made, so to speak, then all is good. It doesn't matter who gets killed. It doesn't matter how many people get killed. It doesn't matter if their own people get killed. As long as they're making money, they're happy. Anyways, when we come back, we'll get into more of this intelligence analyst business. We'll get more into the understanding of how a lot of intelligence actually comes out through conspiracy theory and how to start sort of piecing some of the stuff together. It's actually not that. It's not complex. It's a long haul. It's in many cases tedious work that you have to sit through hours of material in order to start piecing the little bits together, and that's kind of where the difficulty emerges. Anyways, on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're saying, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for, $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our break. We were talking about being an intelligence analyst and starting to look to see what we can get out of the conspiracy theories in order to piece together a good picture of the intelligence that is going on. Sort of do this sort of analytical work to get us a good sense of intelligence, to understand what's going on with the operatives. When you do this, I said you're looking at a number of lectures. You look at who's giving the lecture, and you actually look at the crowd who's listening to it. In a lot of cases, what I've been watching the last few weeks, a lot of blame is being put on the Bush family. Now, the thing is what you have to look at the Bush family and understand, and this is sort of gives you a sort of a look at the Illuminati, because the Bush family is supposedly part of the Illuminati. They have these strange connections. They people make connections all the way back to witchcraft groups and so on and so forth. But the thing is, if you look into them more carefully, you begin to realize that there are a lot of other people in there involved in there as well, and none other, including Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. All of them were involved in these secret societies. So if all these people are involved in these secret societies, what makes Bush so much more evil than everybody else as compared to the rest of the people inside these so-called secret societies? And as you go through this, you realize that what's happening is that it's the naughty children starting to rat each other out. There's one group that sort of says, "Hey, this is what happened. It's not my fault, though. This is the person who did it." Right? That you're starting to get someone ratting someone out. And a lot of times there is, in many cases, a political motive behind it. That this is a way to. There's two forms of assassination. There's a physical form of assassination where you actually shoot somebody, and then there's a form of assassination that is known as a political assassination, where you destroy the person's career by destroying the person's reputation. And if you can sling enough mud at the person, whether it's true or not, a large chunk of that mud will eventually stick. And of course, the person's going to get dirty. At least appear to be dirty in the public's eye. And that destroys the career. And of course, you still, beyond George Bush, you still have Jeb Bush. And there are a number of other Bushes that may have political aspirations. Of course, you now have a Clinton dynasty coming up, They're or at least hoping to have a Clinton dynasty, but there are a lot of people who don't like the Clintons either, and they have a lot of political assassinations or assassination attempts on the Clinton side of things. I mean, what happened to Howard Dean and the Dean Scream? The Dean Scream was actually, a lot of people don't realize this, the Dean Scream was a political assassination. They went after this guy to destroy him. Just the same way this whole thing with Dominic Strauss-Kahn and the pimping trial. Well, do you think that these people like Berlusconi and Dominic Strauss-Kahn, a lot of these people at the top levels of society who have these parties and these girls show up and they, well, we didn't know they were prostitutes. Yes, I had sex with them, but I didn't know they were prostitutes. Do you really think that no one knew what was going on? I mean, look at the recent investigations coming out of the United Kingdom into the pedophile rings in the in Westminster. A similar type of report has come out recently, just within a week or so of the UK investigation. A report came out in Washington D.C. Listing a large number of establishment pedophiles and the problems that are going on inside Washington with pedophilia. And this also comes on the heels, in many ways, of what's going on in Ontario, where the Premier of Ontario, who is in many ways has a lot of pedophilic tendencies in terms of her views on open sexuality with children. She's trying to bring in a sex education law that is basically pedophilia, and there's a huge uproar within the private community, but the media, which is owned by the unions, has said nothing on it. It's almost invisible in the media. So we do have a lot of this going on. I think it's, but going back to the Dominic Strauss-Kahn, if everybody knows what's going on, this sort of really isn't much of a secret in the top levels of society. Why is this person on trial? Well, if you look what's actually happening surrounding the trial, is that this guy is a former finance minister of France. He was slated to be the next president of France. He was also slated to be, one of the top heads of the IMF. He was supposed to stay at the post of the head of IMF, the International Monetary Fund. But another group wanted a woman at the top of the IMF. They said it was time for a woman at the top of the IMF. Well, how do you get rid of this guy? You have this guy up here. He's very powerful. He's very, everybody likes him. He's a well-known guy, and he's head of a powerful agency. How do you get rid of the guy? Well, you use political assassination. You find something he's done wrong, and you out him on it. And everybody in that group who knows about this goes along with it because it's in everybody's interest to go along with, the main thing so that you can have this sort of so-called brand new outcome. And that's what happened. The political winds changed. It was time for a woman IMF, and it was time for Dominic Strauss-Kahn to go. And so what you have here is you have a political assassination. So you see, it is not out of the realm that one Illuminati will rat out another Illuminati for another political purpose. In other words, as political winds change, no Illuminati is safe. It depends on where you land on that political wind scale. If you're on the right side of the political wind, you've got the wind going with you, great. If you have the wind going against you, you're going to get knocked over. That's kind of the way it works in politics. And I think this has been said a lot before. One of the common phrases in politics is that there are no friends in politics. If you want a friend in politics, go get a dog. And that's the sort of the comment. And that means that there is no loyalties in politics. There are no loyalties in politics. The loyalty exists only to the point where the relationship that you have with the mutual relationship that you have with the person, if there's a mutual benefit to the two of you, that's the limit to which your relationship actually exists. Outside of that mutual benefit, there is no more relationship. So if that mutual interest dies, or that mutual goal dies, or has been accomplished, then you have a reshuffling of your relationship. What you thought was normal and natural now becomes something completely different. And this is what we see here. We see this all over the time. We see, two different sort of Illuminati families is you have the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. A lot of people have been blaming David Rockefeller for a lot of these so-called wars. But the thing is, a lot of people don't realize that you also have the Rothschilds in there as well. The Rothschilds have been equally involved in these different things. The Rothschilds are World Shell. Rockefeller are BP Mobile and Exxon. So basically, the Rockefellers are aligned with England. The Shell Group are aligned with mainstream. The Shell Group Rothschilds are aligned with Europe, mainstream Europe. And this is where there's running line. Look at the sort of the back and forth between the UK and the EU, right? The UK is threatening to leave the EU and cause all these sort of upset. The UK never gave up its dollar currency. It said, I'm not giving up the currency. And you have all these sort of back and forth between these different groups here. So you see that there is no loyalty amongst the group. Everybody is there to fight for their own interests. They work together on interests that are common to them, and then they fight on other things. And there's always about the sort of who's going to control everything. So you understand that there is no single new world order. There are a whole variety of new world orders. It depends on what group you're involved in. And the thing is, there are also no loyalty among the Illuminati. So you don't actually have a single unified conspiracy theory. You have a bunch of sort of interminglings between interested parties, and it appears to be a so-called conspiracy theory. I'll give an example here, right? One of the things that we always often point out, and there's horrors on both sides. The Democrat leaks have been leaking out information from the CIA on the goings-on in South America during George Bush, the first George Bush. That's the Reagan-Bush era. This is particularly surrounding the Iran-Contra. This involves the invasion of Panama, these freedom exercises. And the revelation is that, particularly in Panama, these different areas, is you have the American military training groups. This is particularly with the School of America, training groups in paramilitary groups in South America, not to go after military targets, but to go after civilian targets and cause a lot of pain within the civilian population as well. This includes rape, this includes murder. In other words, a lot of the things you're seeing ISIS doing today, the United States has been doing for a long time. The United States has been setting up these groups like ISIS for a long time. It's not something new. All you have to do to understand ISIS is go back to the Iran-Contra issue, and you'll see exactly what's happening now with ISIS. You'll see the exact same thing going on with ISIS. And you'll then begin to understand how ISIS is actually an American group. You'll also understand how Al-Qaeda is an American group. And the thing is, you go, oh yeah, that's Bush, that's the Republicans. But we tend to forget and start thinking that, well, yeah, that is Bush. But in South America, who benefits in South America in many cases? A lot of times they're benefiting fruit companies that supply Europe with food. And so when you go look at Europe and see, well, okay, what's going on in Europe, you see first the breakup of Yugoslavia, then you saw the actions in Kosovo, then you saw the actions in Ukraine. Well, who was Yugoslavia? Who was Kosovo? Who was Ukraine? That's Clinton, the Democrat, was Yugoslavia. Kosovo was Clinton, the Democrat. And Ukraine is also Obama, the Democrat. So you have Democrats on both. Democrats doing exactly the same thing that the Republicans have been doing. Same type of events. We see the sort of the shipment of women, sort of the comfort women, the sex slaves out of the sort of for the human trafficking out of Europe, particularly out of Albania. A lot of Albanians. Clinton and Obama said they were going into Kosovo the Democrats said they were going into Kosovo to liberate everybody, right? To liberate the Albanians. Yet the Albanians are the ones who are being trafficked into mainstream Europe, into Germany, into Sweden, into Amsterdam, into all these sort of open sexual places. And even England had a major problem with human trafficking of Albanian and sort of these Slavic women. into its country. Major problems. The problems also arise here. But the thing is, it wasn't this whole thing of sex trafficking was never aimed at the Albanians, because the Albanians, a lot of these people were Slavs. They were Russian speaking. The finger was then later on turned around and pointed at Russia and created a case against Russia. So you can see here that the United States was using, in terms of its psychological operation, in terms of preparing the ground for warfare, was preparing a case against Russia to continue the war against Russia, even though Russia had said we surrender. The wall had fallen, and the Cold War was supposed to be over. But what happened is that instead of ending the Cold War, Clinton continued the Cold War. And who was funding Clinton? It wasn't David Rockefeller. It was this guy named Mark Rich. Mark Rich was the money behind Clinton. Well, who's Mark Rich? He was one of the heads of Royal Dutch Shell. That's a Rothschild group. He wasn't an Exxon group. So you have someone on the European side of things pushing for more, for more, what you call European colonialism. So you have the American colonialism, now you have European colonialism re-emerging. Even though the Europeans will come up and say and talk about, oh, how we're tolerant, we're an open society, this is what socialism is. The reality is the European colonialism is still alive and well, and is still very much a race-based issue. And this is what's going on, but a lot of the underneath stuff, the sort of the hidden part, doesn't actually come out in the conspiracy. The racial aspect of Europe and the European racism is hidden. It's a hidden thing. And they tend to blame it, oh, this is what the right is, this is what socialism, this is what the Nazis are doing, this is what the United States is, this is not Europe. But if you sit down and look at it, you see the Europeans are directly involved. And so it's not one group is doing one thing as opposed to another. Both groups are doing things. Both groups have evil on their side. Both groups, in the name of the better will, or the greater good, are committing atrocities at alarming rates. And this is what false flags are. False flags are ways that history is used to create issues. In other words, a lot of the issues in the world, a lot of the need for war, a lot of the pushing society to war, the horrors that we see that push us to war, like 9/11, are actually created by our own governments in order to create this psychological condition that prepares the country for war. And this is exactly what happened after 9/11. Right after 9/11, you had Iraq and you had Afghanistan. And that was the push. That was our need to do a lot of things. 9/11 was really a push in the beginning of the American socialist state, the American security state, that Obama today is actually serving. Anyways, we come back on the other side. We'll start looking into the psychologies of evil. We'll see how this actually plays into a large chunk of the so-called socialist society, and the socialist society that is a psychopathic society, the production of a psychopathic society from a socialist society. Socialism produces psychopathy. It produces the psychopathic society, and this is how we're going to get into this, and how we're going to explain how one is connected to the other. On the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for, $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN. Provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our break, everyone. As we're saying before the break, we're talking about how socialism creates a psychopathic society. Part of the problem with socialism is the underlying belief of socialism, that human beings are mechanical, that everything is chemically based, that we are simply a collection of neurons and sort of electrical impulses, or chemically based electrical impulses. Because if you look at the how electricity is produced inside the human body, it's produced by a chemical reaction. Just much the way the battery is a chemical power plant. It produces electricity. A battery produces electricity via chemical reaction. The same thing kind of happens in the human body. It's a chemical. It's the electricity in the body is produced by a chemical reaction. So these chemical reactions in the body, inside the brain, produce electrical impulses. This gives us these flashes, if you will, inside of our brain. This is the functioning of the brain. And we are considered to be no more than this. And because we are natural, we are of nature, and there's no guiding will to this. There is no outside power, there is no God, there is no greater good, there's nothing. It's fundamentally a random chemical experiment, if you will, or a random chemical event. This means that there's no conscious thought to rape. It's a natural impulse. There's no conscious impulse. There's no conscious or will behind murder. It's simply a natural impulse. These things are all fundamental impulses. And because they are all impulses, they're of no significance. There's no right. There's no wrong. There's no, nothing. There's actually this is the whole purpose of a nihilist. A nihilist is sort of the extreme of socialism. So, well, if nothing exists, then nothing matters. And they believe in sort of, in many ways, a society without limits, a society without boundaries and borders. And this actually can be heard in the song, John Lennon's song, Imagine. This whole concept of a socialist, you would call it a socialist utopia, the communist utopia, where everyone is living a wonderful life because everybody is free. There's no property. There's nothing to worry about. All these things. For some reason, they believe that the solution to all of our problems would be if we just simply get rid of everything. That we were all these impulses, and we live as these impulses. That nothing would be wrong. That we would have a very nice society. One, you can look at history and see what happened inside the Soviet Union and what happened inside most of the in history. Look at what happened in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge, and look at all these events and begin to understand that socialism did not produce the utopia that it promised to. Matter of fact, it created a living hell. And the thing is, most socialists, when they hear them, will actually ignore their own history and say, well, that's because, and then give you an excuse why it was not properly socialist. And that this time, the next socialism, the next socialist experiment will work. In other words, they are fatally optimistic about socialism, even though they actually have no success to actually look back on. And in every case, when you look back at socialism, you look back at what happened in the socialist society, and that includes Nazi Germany. With the Nazis, you look at what was going on there, and they began to see the horrors after World War II. The horrors of what actually happened sort of emerged. And people were shocked. Well, how did this actually happen? And then how did the German people allow this? It wasn't that Hitler did this. Hitler did not cart off all those Jews to the concentration camp. And it wasn't just simply Jews, but I'm just going to give the Jews the credit at this point here. Let's not make an issue out of it. Let's make this. It doesn't matter who was there, but millions of people were sent to these concentration camps, and millions of people died in them. So, how did this happen? Did Hitler Did Hitler round everybody up and do this? No. What happened? His soldiers, the people, the bureaucracy, everybody involved was involved with the German government, helped send these millions of people to their death. And you ask yourself, well, how does a whole society do this? And that's because that's what socialism does. Socialism creates a psychopathic society that does not understand what they're doing is wrong. And can you understand this? This is how we can sort of bring this into a further understanding. I mean, how many people believe that abortion is wrong? Look at the issue of around abortion today. How many millions of women go out to these abortion marches to support abortion? What is abortion? There is a baby inside of you. They don't want to call it a baby. They can't call it a baby anymore. They call it a biological mass now. And because it's a biological mass, it's no longer alive, it's no longer considered to have life, then an abortion is simply a medical procedure that eliminates this biological mass. Again, socialists and socialism redefining what things are and explaining to you why your sense of reality, why that mass inside you is not actually a baby, but really is simply a lump of mass that you can get rid of. And say, well, and then they turn around and say, well, yes, we're conscious people. We have morals and ethics. And they do. We have morals and ethics. And what do you see? We see recently, in the last few months in Europe, these protests going around and these new laws being heralded in the newspaper that now bestiality in Europe is now against the law. In other words, up until basically 2014, 2013, bestiality was legal in Europe, along with child pornography, along with open child sexual relationships, adult child sexual relationships. In other words, if you wanted to have sex with a 3-year-old, no problem. Want to have sex with a donkey, no problem. You like that chicken in your house? Hey, no problem. But there was a problem starting in 2011 when you had a protest by these animal rights group called PETA that believed that the animals were being abused and it wasn't proper for human beings to start abusing animals in a sexual fashion. So what happened in 2013, 2014, 2015? On the basis of animal rights, not the fact that girls are being raped in these bestiality movies, these bestiality porn movies, the girls didn't matter. The human beings being raped didn't matter. It was the animals who mattered. It was the animals' rights who were being violated. So what happens? You have record, and even the United Kingdom have pointed this out. Most groups looking at human trafficking have pointed out Europe is experiencing, under its latest round of socialism, the largest number of sexual slaves, largest number of people being trafficked. This is women and girls primarily being trafficked for sexual abuse purposes. None of these people mattered. It was the animals and the animal rights who mattered. There were protests for the women being held captive in these sexual environments. There wasn't any protests, but there weren't laws created to protect these women. Even though we had International Rights Day about a week ago, Michelle Obama was out there talking about how we need to protect violence against women and children. Well, that same week, the articles came out in the United States and in the United Kingdom showing how the government is directly involved in human trafficking. And that it's a record problem that the record number of people in the government are involved in this. That has reached a crisis point. So here's Michelle Obama not talking about doing anything specific, but simply talking at a lecture, giving a speech about protecting women and children, and yet have done absolutely nothing about it. One Republican, one crazy Republican from the Christian right, dared to get up and try to pass a law, more legislation that would ban pornography in Congress, so that and the government actually. So government workers, while they're on the job, could not look at pornography. They couldn't be surfing porn sites. Because in many cases, when this is how these people were caught, not only were they caught with images of other children on their desktop on the computer, but they were caught with movies that they were in. In other words, they were caught molesting children because they were in some of the videos that were on the desk. So the government was actually producing, these government people were producing, on government time, on taxpayer time, they were producing child pornography. They were raping children. The law did not get any sponsors. In order for a bill to succeed, you have to have sponsors. You have the co-sponsors, right? This is how a bill works. Some member of the House writes a bill, other people come up and co-sponsor the bill, and the bill goes forward, and if it gets enough votes, it becomes law. So getting a co-sponsor is your first major step. No co-sponsors at all. None. No words from Obama. No words from Michelle Obama on this. So where's her actual stance on the protection of women and children? Well, it's right there in her votes. No action on protection for any women or children. No action on protecting girls against rape. No action on protecting girls against human trafficking. Nothing. Even when the evidence clearly shows that the government is directly involved, that there are people within the government who are directly involved. None of this matters. It didn't matter to them at all. Yet we see protests for political purposes all over the place. Yet when it comes to this, and this is from the socialists are very active. They protest a lot of things. But when you look at what they're protesting and what they're protesting about, and you look at the reasons behind it, what you see is a psychopathic society. You see the psychopath beginning to emerge. Because it's not about the human being who's being abused or being raped. It's about the animal. The human being was completely invisible. And someone actually went on YouTube and actually demonstrated this. They put a puppy in the middle of the street, tied to a post. And a lot of people came by and patted the puppy, and fed the puppy, and so on and so on, and took pity on the puppy. The next section of the video showed a homeless person. No one looked at the homeless person. Everyone walked by. No one was looking at him. No one even paid attention to him. This is the hallmark of a psychopathic society. And we see this on an increasing level, where the society does not know the difference between right and wrong. And the thing is, we say, well, how do we change this? How do we shift from this? Because what's happening is, to say the least, disturbing. And there are people who do care. There are people who say, hey, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. We need to change this. Well, how do you change it? How do you change it, particularly when we have a government, a social-left government, that thinks what it's doing is fine, has no issue with everything? People say, well, I don't want to get involved in politics. Politics is, well, it's not for me. It's, these people are all bad. They're all the same. Well, to a certain degree, they are all the same. There's a lot of similarity, but they're not all the same. Just in the way, the thing is, you don't have a single conspiracy theory. You don't have a single monolithic group running everything. And you see the backfighting back and forth between these various different groups. You do have people who understand what is done, what's going on is wrong. You do have whistleblowers. You do have people standing up and saying, hey, this is wrong. So, and this is the case. You have someone who understands that this is wrong. What you want is you want a government who's one, because you realize the government is the problem. They are the bully. You want a government that's small. You also want a government that has some degree of morality, at least claims to have some degree of morality, so that you can, when you protest, you can push them on a particular issue of morality. You push on that issue of morality. And for me, from what I've observed, and I'll bring this out further, I'll observe that actually the Republicans on the whole, the conservatives on the whole, produce a more conscientious, a more moral candidate than do the Democrats or the Socialists on the left. Now, you may argue that the Republicans and the conservatives are social on the right, that they're Nazis, basically. And that can be argued, it very definitely can be argued. But on the whole, when you look at the behaviors and you look at how they vote and some of the laws they put forward, you can find more conscientious Republicans and conservatives than you can who will actually act on these protests than you will on the conservative left side, than on the socialist left side. So anyways, when we come back on the other side, we will continue with our last and final segment, going into some of this whole thing about how to deal with what's going on in society, how to deal with the politics of it without going to war. We don't want to go to war on these different issues. We don't want violence on this. We want to resolve the violence. We want to have a more peaceful world. Well, how do we achieve this? How do we get a better world and get rid of some of these sort of these psychopathic tendencies? How do we resolve these problems? On the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Danny Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back, everybody, to the last segment of Headlines and Beyond. As I said before, we're talking about the psychopathic society and how to resolve some of these problems peacefully. I mean, this is the whole thing. Well, you get up and you go to war and you start killing off these people, and that's the way to get rid of these nasty people. Well, the problem is if you advocate violence, the only result that you're going to end up having with is more violence. In order to stop violence, in order to stop the cycle of violence, and this is even true with abuse. If you look at people or kids who have been abused, you want to break that cycle of violence. You want to break that cycle of abuse, from generation to generation. What you need to do is you need to pull the person out of the violence. You need to put them into a non-violent environment. You need to have them seek peace. And non-violent means of dealing with their anger. You don't want to push them into further anger. You don't want to get them more violent. That's not going to solve the problem. That's simply going to continue the cycle. In order to break the cycle of violence, you need to actually stop this violence itself. At some point in time, one of the groups will have to say, well, yes, I was wrong. Yes, I was attacked. Yes, I was violated. But I will not continue down the path of violence. I will not continue down the path of anger. And find a way to peacefully deal with the anger issues that you're feeling. In other words, you need to deal with the anger. You need to resolve the anger that you have in a peaceful manner. And the thing is, this is in many ways the exact same way we have to deal with things politically. This is the psychology of the of the personal state often reflects what's going to happen psychologically in politics. There's a psychology to politics. That there is a psychology, an observable psychology to the world. And this is why you say journalism is observational psychology. You use journalism as a observational psychology. That's the way we're doing here. And that way, if you understand this, you now understand that there is a possibility to solution. And one of the test grounds that's going on here in Canada that we can do this at is right now in Ontario, they've actually imposed a sex education law that is essentially pedophilia. And what's happening with the law is you have a lot of parents starting to fight back, trying to say, hey, we don't want this. But the problem is that in many cases they don't know how to go about doing that. The groups are very fractured on this. Some groups want to make certain points and say these things should be brought up. Certain points should be brought up. Others will argue and say, well, those points shouldn't be brought up. We should be just doing this. In other words, they aren't all on the same page. And none of them are actually, bizarrely enough, none of them are talking about the psychopathic society created by socialism. In other words, they don't recognize that the liberals in the NDP are the problem. That in order to resolve the problem, you're going to have to get rid of them. So it's not an issue of targeting a particular law that's the problem. You have to go to the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is socialism and the fact that it creates a psychopathic society. That's what you have to aim for. And this battle about this law, the sex education law, is simply one aspect or one battle in the war against socialism. So yes, we are talking about a war on socialism, but we're not talking about a violent war. We're not going about violence. We're not going out there and shooting people. We have to engage in a war. We want a more peaceful world. Anyone who's a peace activist, and you really want to be an activist, the only way to conduct a war non-violently is to be non-violent. Is to deal with these psychological issues and deal with the reality of it. And trying to find ways of dealing with these anger issues, these issues that make people angry in a non-violent fashion. And the thing is, we got to realize that socialism is if you don't have, and this is the problem with socialism, if you don't have a soul, and you are all chemical impulse, then there's no right and no wrong. Rape doesn't matter, and this has been demonstrated. And this is what I'm saying. The pedophile is a natural outcome of the psychopathic society. When the psychopathic society no longer understands what's right and wrong, then pedophilia loses its sense of morality. Pedophilia is no longer wrong. And you do have these people who believe that children are sexual objects, people are sexual objects, that we are sexual beings. And this includes children. And you have photographers with their own children taking nude photographs of their children because they say they are sexual beings. And they do not see themselves as pedophiles, as something horrible, as monstrous. And that's because they're psychopaths. They don't understand what they're doing is wrong. And as I said before, we would look at from the Christian perspective. You look at Christ on the cross, and what did he say? He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. For they know not what they're doing." This here demonstrates the nature of psychopathy, the nature of the psychopath. That they don't understand what's happening is wrong. That they think that what they're doing is right. They don't understand hate. And so you're going to have these people who are pedophiles arguing that what they're doing is moral. What they're doing is right. What they're doing is okay. And this is exactly what you have Kathleen Wynne doing. But what you don't have is you don't have the analysis on the other side from any of the other sources are actually going out and arguing this. They're not pointing the psychopathic finger at the psychopath. They're not saying, hey, this is psychopathic behavior. They're not identifying. It's not coming out in the news. It's not even coming out in the alternative media. If you look at the alternative media, none of the alternative media is talking about these psychopathic tendencies within these socialist societies. They've completely ignored the issue. They've sort of divorced this issue from the pedophilia. But the pedophilia is a consequence of socialism. It's a consequence of a psychopathic society. It's caused by the psycho. So it's well contained within the context of a psychopathic society. You cannot divorce the psychopathic society from the pedophile. And this has been demonstrated historically. And the thing is, it's easily observable. Once we start putting these pieces together, it becomes much easier to observe this. And you can start seeing, hey, this is a form of psychopathy. These people, pedophiles, are psychopathic. They don't understand what they're doing is wrong. And their argument is, we're educating children. This is what they're doing. They're educating children how to have sex problems, how to accept these things that are happening to them. And the thing is, they don't understand. Even when a kid is crying, a kid is crying in a video because she's being raped. They don't understand what they're doing is wrong. They don't understand, hey, they shouldn't be doing this. To them, this is what they consider to be normal. What they consider to be okay. And the thing is, even if the person doesn't say it, they're not, in many cases, the person may be drugged or they're knocked out or passed out. And again, there's no issue of whether it's right or wrong. And the thing is, what has to happen is that there has to be a political component. There has to be a stopping of this. And for me, again, based on observation, it is the Republican, is the conservative, it is the right who are most responsive, because they do reduce government. They do end up having, because they don't have a lot of taxes involved, they reduce taxes to a point where there's not enough money to fund the government. So your government agencies are sort of let go. And as your agencies are let go, there's not enough people to fund all these different avenues, the different agencies. And now the thing is, this is where activists are really wrong about these things. If you really want to be an activist, you want a Republican, you want a conservative, because you don't want the government in there. You want to be in there resolving the problem. Because as soon as the government gets in there, they're going to screw things up. You have a government in there, you're going to have, in many cases with these agencies, you're going to have pedophiles within these agencies. This is what's been identified, is that a lot of these agencies, these welfare agencies, have pedophiles in them. So when a person goes in, a girl has got something wrong and goes in for counseling with a probation officer or with a social worker, that social worker will likely abuse that girl and start demanding sex from her in order to resolve her problems. The girl wants something, she needs some money, whatever. That guy is going to start abusing her, or the girl is going to start abusing, because you have these psychopaths, you have these pedophiles within the government system, and this has been identified in the United Kingdom and the United States. So it's definitely going on here. It hasn't been identified here, but the thing is, it's been identified in the United States and the United Kingdom. You know what's going on here. You know what's going on in the government on a more significant level than is being let on here. That's what I'm sort of saying, is you really have to look around to see what's going on, other sources outside the mainstream sources, and this includes small papers, because this is how you pull your bits and pieces of information together to get a better picture of what's actually going on. And the thing is that you do have to unelect these people. And then once you unelect people, it's not about simply unelecting the socialists and putting in a conservative, putting in a Republican. Is once these people are elected, you need to stay active as a political bloc to make sure that they make these politicians who are on the right, who say they are moral, who say they're conservative, who say they're Republican, make sure that they maintain a moral position. Every time they vote, look, is their position on this particular topic, whatever they're voting on, is it a moral position? Is there a lapse in position? Is there a lapse in the morality? Are they promoting violence? Are they promoting hatred? Look at the positions on these things. If you find them violating a particular morality, call them on it. Just the way you protested and got them into office because you wanted a better morality, when they're in office, call them on the morality. Get the constituents and say, hey, this person is doing this. They're voting on a law that will create war for no particular reason. It's not an issue of defense. We need to stop this. And you get your people together, you get your organization together, and you move forward to stop the war. In other words, once you elect a politician, you make sure that you keep your group together to make sure the politicians and the political process stays moral. In other words, the morality is the focus of your politics. If you want to bring morality back into politics again, you want to have a non-psychopathic society, then morality needs to be the focus of your political activity. And this is activists, right? There's poverty out there. You know the government's the bully. And you want to get in, you want to get involved because you know you can bring a lot of people together in these areas and sort of do a lot of community good. You can build community involvement in anti-poverty movements. Governments kill this. Get rid of the socialist government that creates a massive agency and does nothing. Bring in a Republican one, and then from there, start working on peace. Start working on all these other different issues that will make society a more moral, a safer society, or sort of a less violent society. Work on that. Work on these particular issues. That's being active. If you're simply going to protest and make noise about something, but not actually do anything about it, you're not an activist. You're simply, to put it mildly, you're an asshole. You're an obnoxious ass. You're a person who thinks your voice should be louder than everybody else. And you're the one yelling and screaming about nothing. Because you know, at the end of the day, if you're yelling and screaming and you don't do anything about it, in other words, you don't pick up the responsibility for resolving these particular problems. That you say, hey, there's a solution to this. If you don't take the solution and work on it yourself, and expect somebody else to do the work, then you're not active. Because you haven't done anything. You're a complainer. That's all you are. If you really want to be an activist, then you need to be active and you need to be involved. And that means directly involved in the solution itself. And in order to be directly involved in the solution itself, you need to get rid of the government who's standing in your way. You need to get rid of the bullies. And that means unelecting socialists. That means unelecting the NDP, unelecting the liberals, unelecting the Democrats. And bringing in people who will stand out, who will move the obstacles to peace, remove the obstacles to being an active, involved citizen. Anyways, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoy our broadcast, our editions here. Please pass this around because you're not going to get this news anywhere else. You're not going to get this analysis anywhere else. No one else is sort of paying, not even in the alternative media. No one in the alternative media is paying attention to this. The information that you get here, you will not get anywhere else. So please pass this around. Please forward this to your friends. Get them to subscribe. The more subscribers I have, the better it's going to work out for everybody here. I'm not asking for any money at this particular point in time. When I do ask for money, all I'll be asking for is if you have $1 or $2 sitting around you, anything, you have something lying around in your pocket, like $1, $2, $5, whatever it is, stick it in an envelope and just send it up to the address listed down below. Anyways, that's it for this week. I'll see you on the midweek edition for iNN's Headlines and Beyond. All right, take it easy and goodbye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.